You mentioned that your report that UN mission for human rights has taken actions. Some activities are in order to improve the situation with human rights in the occupied territories. What exactly you have done?
Well, yes, as you've rightly pointed out, I've just launched our 17th quarterly public report that covers the period from the 16th of November 2016 to the 15th of February 2017. The Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, we've been here now for over 3 years, works on both sides of the contact line directly in the conflict-affected area. We work day in, day out, interviewing victims and witnesses of violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law. And then we verify this information, document it, advocate with relevant authorities, refer cases to humanitarian organizations, and undertake interventions, and then issue these public reports.
Why are these concerns raised after these meetings that are in this report?
So the conflict-related sexual violence report that we did covers a period from April 2014 until February 2017. So it's looking at the whole time frame of the armed conflict. And so the recent visits that we undertook to places where people were detained were not directly linked to this report. Conflict-related sexual violence is part of gender-based violence. Conflict-related sexual violence is not only about violence that is acted against women, it is also about violence which perpetrators commit against men as well. Mm-hmm. The issue is that it's obviously in the scope of a conflict, both in the time frame, in the location, the geography, and again, as I said, we particularly focused on people who have been detained and were in detention and then faced sexual violence during the conflict.
Also, the report provides a very important figure that you have the documented data of 23 deaths, all 23 persons, civilians, casualties within this period under monitoring. How you document, which deaths you document, in which way, how this figure emerged?
So we have been consistently documenting civilian casualties that have taken place, occurred during the conflict. When we talk about civilian casualties, it's clearly both people who have died and people who have been injured. We give an estimated figure of a total figure for these civilian casualties, and the figure you're referring to, the 23 civilian deaths during the time frame of this report, came about because of shelling, again on both sides of the contact line. And there was a particularly critical moment during the spike in hostilities between the 28th of January and the 5th of February around the triangle of Avdiivka, Yasynuvata, and Donetsk airport, where we saw a high number of civilian casualties. We make the point in the report that while this is actually a decrease in the number of civilian casualties since our last reporting period, the 3 months prior to November the 15th, it is actually an increase in the number of civilian casualties in comparison to 1 year ago. And also the majority of those individuals who were killed, some 12, were mostly due to shelling. With regard to your question about how we gather the information, we go to the sites where a civilian casualty has unfortunately occurred. We talk to either if they're injured, we talk to individuals, we talk to witnesses, we go to the morgues if necessary, hospitals, we cross-reference with law enforcement bodies. So we really try to verify from a number of different sources the information that we have. And we also work very closely with other international partners on this issue, including the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission.
17 reports. What dynamic do you observe in terms of human rights protection? Don't you see the freezing of the situation, or maybe improvements, or maybe regress instead, backlash, setback? What do you observe?
Well, I think what we've seen is that the conflict has led to some systemic human rights violations that were here in Ukraine before the conflict even started, becoming more acute. I've mentioned already one, the use and practice while people are in detention of ill treatment and torture. That's one very specific. But we have also seen that there has been an openness and willingness to address some very specific violations. And I think what's important is that there's also legislation being put in place, particularly around the judicial reform that's also coming into place, that's absolutely key for questions when it comes to accountability for crimes that have taken place before the conflict and also obviously in relation to the conflict. So it varies, but I think what's essential in any country is that if there's an openness and a willingness of a state to actually discuss, address and try to make efforts to meet its human rights obligations, and I think that's what we see here.